When I first became a janitor, I immediately set my sights on working the night shift. The quiet shifts, doubled with the fact that you'd be alone at work for hours, made me think the work would be easy breezy. For the most part, I was right, and I eventually climbed my way up to being the lead position in a company that cleaned schools. The company stated that multiple schools needed my care and expertise, so that meant I would have to travel from building to building and would sometimes pull overtime shifts. I'm a night owl, and the work isn't that bad, so it didn't really bother me. However, when I'm having a bad night or something, it can get pretty annoying. In the schools I've worked at before, the halls would have stepped-on gum on the floor and grassy dirt clumps from the athletes stomping around, and don't even get me started on the discarded papers and broken pencils lying haphazardly all around. I've got to scrape all that gum up and throw away the rest before I can take the floor machine to the halls, and that can be very time-consuming. There are other janitors that handle bathrooms and classrooms, and I'm thankful for that. That's the thing about kids. The majority don't think about how much work is needed after they get their education. But someone's got to do it. I like to think that my job is just as important as the teachers, and I really don't understand what the hell gets into the kids' heads when they decide to leave literal trash on the ground. Or even, having heard this from other employees, doing something like leaving empty Gatorade bottles in the toilets. We place garbage cans around the school, and most of them don't even get used as often as they should. But enough of that. I want to talk about a high school I was sent to, starting my shift at 11 p.m. The other janitors leave by then, and I've got to handle cleaning the hallways and maybe a little bit of maintenance if necessary. It was an older building, mostly made of brick, and was constructed in the 1940s. Before I go on, I want to explain that I lived in a pretty rough area, and the schools I clean are close to where I lived. On the news, you'll see things like robberies or shootings, and the schools have troubled kids coming from low-income families. Break-ins have been reported, and one school I remember cleaning had an occurrence where computers and other things went missing. The janitor working that night left one of the doors unlocked for a time after an event, and the kids must have figured it out. The first time I went to that school, my manager actually warned me about it and told me to make sure that the doors were locked. Also, for obvious reasons, I won't be disclosing the name of the school. Anyways, when I arrived on a cloudy Monday, my boss was waiting for me in the janitor's office. "Tim, how's it hanging?" he asked with a smile. My boss is one of those older guys that still plays video games and brags about his Call of Duty battles. I gave him a nod and set my car keys down on the table with my cooler that stored my meal for the night. I looked back to him, and he explained something to me that caught me off guard. "So, I've got something I need to tell you. This school is unique, and I feel I should personally share these guidelines with you." He turned to the desk and opened a drawer. Inside, there was a blue binder that he opened with papers in there, and he turned the pages until he got to a specific one. Pulling it out, he handed it to me. "Please read that before you start. Make sure you follow everything it says and don't forget any of it. It's extremely important. For your safety." "Okay," I murmured, glancing at the paper. "Go ahead and keep that copy for yourself, all right? Well, that's it for me. I've got a hot date with my bed. Take care, Tim. You'll be fine. You're a good worker," he said with a sullen look and patted me on the shoulder as he walked away. I took my eyes away from the paper and watched him leave. Once the door shut behind him, I turned my attention back to the paper titled "List of Rules for the Night Shift." It read as follows. "Before you go over these rules, understand that we have done everything in our power to drive this thing out of the school. but all of our efforts have been without success. Any activity has only been reported after hours, and these are the only forms of defense you have against the entity. Rule number 1. Once you start your shift, enter the basement and turn the lights on. Then find the radio in the far east corner of the maintenance room and tune it to station 104.7. It likes classical music. Rule number 2. Before you clean the halls, find locker 1315 and open it. You will see an old red box on the top shelf. Open it and leave an offering. It can be anything as small as a coin, but nothing bigger than that. We're not sure why, but it collects things, and it will be appeased, hopefully. If you notice the inside of the locker is dirty, it will appreciate a cleaning. Rule number 3. If you hear something like footsteps or kids in the halls, ignore them and continue your duties. It's trying to fool you into thinking there are students around after hours. If you go to them, you are putting yourself at risk. Do not go to them. Rule number 4. If the lights start flickering in your general vicinity, immediately lock yourself in the nearest janitor's closet and remain in there for 5 minutes. Once the 5 minutes is over, you'll be safe and can exit the room. However, if you exit and the lights are still flickering and see what looks like a figure standing in the hallway you're in, I'm sorry. Rule number 5. If the power goes out and the backup generator doesn't switch on, stay calm and call maintenance. This may be a normal occurrence, but it has been able to shut the building's power down before. Either way, after you call maintenance, it is imperative that you exit the building and wait for an employee to arrive. It's best to not linger around the building during this time. It is able to use the darkness to invade your senses. You do not want that. Rule number 6. If you see blood anywhere on the walls or the floor, do not under any circumstances clean it. It is another trick to get you to do what it wants. We're still not sure how this works, but the first janitor who cleaned the blood went insane and committed suicide. Instead, call this number and explain the situation. Number attached. A special team will intercept and assist. Rule number 7. Once you have finished your shift and before you arm the alarm system, call that number and inform them you have completed your shift and are exiting the building. This is for assurance that you are up for the task and have followed the rules thoroughly. Thank you, and good luck. I stared at the paper in total disbelief. Was this some kind of sick joke or something? Blood on the walls? A janitor killed themselves? I wanted to call my manager and ask him what the hell was going on, but I didn't want to bother him after he had just left. Looking at the piece of paper, I felt the shiver through my body. Was there really some kind of unknown force haunting the school? After folding the rules up and putting them in my pocket, I made my way to the T5 floor machine and rode it to the first hallway, then parking it. Remembering the first rule, I left the machine by the door and made my way downstairs to flip the lights on and tune the radio to 104.7. The more I thought about it, the more silly this all felt as I walked. I found the radio in the maintenance room and made my way to it. Before I switched the radio on, though, I could have sworn I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. That faint echo of shoes stepping on hard linoleum flooring. "Hello?" I asked the air and suddenly felt like I wasn't alone in this place. Of course, there was no answer, but that was an unmistakable sound of footsteps, and chills shot up my back. The third rule stated to not go to the sounds. Besides already having the hairs stand up on the back of my neck, the sounds came from where I had to go to exit. Would I be breaking the rule? I had to leave the area somehow, but I suddenly felt like staying put. If I'm trying to exit, I wouldn't be exposed to breaking the rules, right? I turned the radio to the station and walked out of the room with trepidation. As I did, thankfully, nothing else creepy happened, so I made my way back upstairs. Before I had to clean the halls with the floor machine, first I had to take the dust mop to the halls and to get the trash up off the floor. There wasn't much, so it was an easy enough task. I got done with one hall and started up the floor machine, peeking over my shoulder as if to see someone in the hall with me. That's when I remembered the second rule: find locker 1315 and leave an offering. I briefly thought about what might happen if I didn't follow the rules or forgot. Would this thing do something awful to me? Searching my pockets for change, I luckily found a couple of singles and 35 cents, then decided on leaving a quarter. Traversing the school in search of locker 1315 felt like an eternity. This was going to be the most annoying shift of my life, I thought. Could I even bear to do this indefinitely? Maybe I could ask my boss to get someone else to work this shift after I'm finished. What did the staff here think of all this? Thoughts flooded my mind as I found locker 1315 and unlocked it with the master key. Sure enough, there was an old and rusted red box on the top shelf. Shocked, I opened it up and was instantly struck with an awful odor. Scrunching my face up in disgust, I put the coin inside and immediately closed it. "This is ridiculous," I said out loud, shutting the locker. Running footsteps echoed and movement in my peripherals caught my attention. To the left of me, there was what looked like people running past the hall I was in. "Hey!" I shouted and began to head in that direction. Then, I stopped. Now, rule number 3 said that if I heard something like footsteps or kids, do not go to them. But the thing is, I actually saw movement. I could see the outline of multiple people running past that hall. There was no way this thing could be a group of students. If it was a ghost or something, wouldn't it be like opaque or white as a sheet? At the time, I felt as if there were really kids in there trying to steal some tech from the school or vandalize something inside. The direction they were headed was toward the media center too. I haven't armed the alarm yet, and there could have been a way in through roof access, or they stayed in the building this whole time. This was a bad area, after all, but that third rule was flashing in my head. This was becoming a now or never moment. My heart began racing, and my legs basically moved on their own. "Screw it!" I shouted, and began running towards the shapes in the hall. What happened next is something that I wasn't fully prepared for, but like a horrible nightmare, the scene before me was all too real. I turned the corner and stopped dead in my tracks. Not only was there blood all over the walls, lockers, and floor, but there was a boy no older than 16 standing in the middle of it all. Gore and entrails lay at his feet. The viscera was spilled out of the stomach as the shirt was ripped apart, with the flesh clearly cut open. The student's face was in an expression of pain and terror, and I couldn't move a muscle, save for the shaking I couldn't control. Slowly, the boy raised an arm, reaching out for me. "Please, help me," He choked out the words and pleaded with wide eyes. Still riddled with terror, I felt some sense of control in my body and began to back away. Just moments ago, 2, maybe 3 students could be seen running in this direction, and now there was an impossibly horrifying situation.
"Don't go."
Again, the words choked out of the boy, and his frown drooped low as ever. Still backing away, I had the sense to turn and bolt for the exit, and remembered that if I saw blood anywhere in the building that I had to call that number. Did I just break Rule 3? I turned my head to the right and saw the hallway I was just in. There was an exit at the end. I then looked back to the boy and saw that his face was no longer the face of an innocent student. The rest of his body was like before, but the head was dark and seemingly longer. His mouth was stretched open much more than any normal human's mouth should be, and the face was this terrible visage. The skin was modeled in a way that resembled clay, like some kind of evil Halloween mask, twisted and vile.
"Don't go."
A deeply loud voice came from the transformed face, and with every ounce of strength I had, I ran down the hall and towards the exit in front of me. A horrible shriek erupted from the bloodied hall, and it quickened my pace. The exit was fastly approaching, but with my already pumping legs, I tripped over my stride and fell face first into the floor. Pain surged from my jaw to my shoulders as the fall was hard. I spat out blood, and with shaking limbs, I got back to my feet and made for the exit in front of me. As soon as I passed the threshold, the cold air of night invaded my senses, and I quickly caught my breath. I was hunched over and breathing in and out like I had just ran a marathon. That was probably the fastest I've ran in years. Not wasting another moment, I went from my pocket to pull out my cell phone and to call that number on the list of rules. But, to my horror, the cell phone was not in my pocket, and neither were the rules. I shouted curses and realized they must have flown out of my pocket from the fall. Looking at the door, I seen there were 2 vertical slits for windows, and I peeked inside. Sure enough, there lay my phone and the folded piece of paper. In my fright, I was just focused on leaving that awful scene and didn't even realize what had happened. At the current moment, I had no choice but to get back in there and grab my stuff. Thankfully, my wallet was still in my back pocket, and it had the key card to enter the building, as the front doors were electronically locked. But I had to make my way to the front of the building to even get back inside. I wanted to flee, but I had this desperate urge to call that number and do what the rules asked. What if this thing would harm students if I didn't? I again thought about what the staff thinks of all this. Has it actually harmed students in the past? What was the true nature of this horrible thing? I didn't have time for questions, though. I had to be brave and get back in there. Swallowing my fear, I quickly made my way to the front doors and placed the keycard against the reader. It unlocked the door and I slipped inside with sweat forming on my hairline. My lip was busted too. Getting back in there felt like I was doing something I shouldn't be. Every step was heavy and I was fighting the feeling of being paralyzed with fear. I've never been in this kind of situation and have never before been exposed to the paranormal. But my urgency to call for help is what kept me alert, and I made my way to the location of my fall. I expected that boy to be at every turn, but he wasn't, and I enjoyed the brief sense of relief. But deep down, I knew that this thing had to know I was back inside. I had 2 options. One was to run to the janitor's office, grab my keys and get the hell out of there. The other was obviously to get my things and make that phone call. I decided on the latter and focused my movements to be as quiet as possible. I had to pass that bloody hallway to get to my phone and the rules, but with shock coursing through my body, nothing was there. No blood, no boy, no mess. It was perfectly clean, save for the mess the students left behind. With a chill down my spine, I quickly turned the corner and started for my fallen items. Within a few moments of me walking down that hallway, the lights began to flicker above me. Oh no, I thought to myself. Not now, not here. I was mere feet away from my phone and the rules. I looked up. The entity was nowhere to be seen, so I chanced it and quickly ran to them and snatched the two up from the floor. With shaky hands, I opened the list of rules and found the number. I had no time to run to the exit. I had to call this number right here, right now. I unlocked my phone, dialed the digits, and put the phone to my ear. It rang as the lights still flickered around me, and finally, after a couple more rings, a voice answered. "Name the location and the nature of your situation," the man said. I told him that I may have broken the third rule and that the lights were flickering. "There was so much blood, and a kid. Please, send help," I cried. "Sir, try and remain calm. A team is being sent to your location now. Are you near a janitor's closet?" I looked around and found that I wasn't. However, when I looked to the exit doors, there was a figure standing there. It was tall and dark with that horrible face I saw on the boy earlier. It wasn't wearing any clothes or anything like that. It had that strange skin stretched over a gaunt frame. "Oh God, it's right in front of me," I said, and felt a tear flow down my cheek as I spoke. "Am I going to die?" I asked the man on the other end of the line. There was no reply. "Hello?" I cried. "The team should arrive within 15 minutes, he finally replied. "I'm sorry, sir. This is all we can do. Goodbye." "No, wait!" But the line went dead, and I stared at the blinking numbers in total disbelief. With a slow motion, I put my arm to my side and looked up to where the entity stood. It was much closer now. It seemed to make its way to me in rhythm with the flickering lights. It was here where I made peace with the fact that I was going to die. So I closed my eyes and began to pray to a God that I never really believed in. "Make it quick. Please, make it painless." Suddenly, I heard the distinct noise of the power going out and was gripped with ferocity by the arms. My eyes shot open. The entity was now screaming in my face with its mouth opened wide, revealing a layered chasm of blackened flesh. There were no sharp teeth or even gums, just a crater of pure horror. Its eyes were as black as the night sky, and I couldn't even tell if there were pupils gazing at me. This thing kept screaming, and as it did, I could feel something slowly die inside of me. Something like my soul being absorbed into this thing's gaping mouth. Before I could even manage to scream, my world went black. The next thing I remember is being carried away on a gurney into the back of an ambulance. My consciousness slipping in and out of awareness. After a time I couldn't gauge. I could then hear the slow beep of a heart monitor. and I opened my eyes. The room was bright, and I knew I was in a hospital.
"He's awake!"
I heard a female nurse shout out and was then standing over me.
"We thought we were going to lose you,"
she cheered. I tried speaking, but no words could escape my lips, only pitiful whimpers and incoherent attempts at words. A couple more nurses then hovered over me and began to do something to my arms. A few moments later, a doctor entered the room and stared at me for a long while.
"Timothy, can you speak or move your body?"
he asked. I once again tried to speak words, and finally was able to utter a reply. "What happened to me?" I said with a voice that sounded hoarse and throaty. The doctor again stared at me, not replying for a moment. He then took a deep breath. "I want you to spend some time getting your strength back first, and then you'll get some answers, okay?" I nodded and closed my eyes again, slipping into darkness. Once I regained consciousness, I actually found the strength to make it to my feet after a meal. My body felt like it would fall apart if I pushed myself too hard, and I was ushered back to my bed. I stayed awake this time and stared out of the large window to my right, watching rainfall splatter against the glass. After some time passed, I heard a voice call out, "Mr. Ferguson." I looked over to the open door and saw a man in casual business attire walk in. "Yes," I croaked. "Who are you, and what happened to me?" I asked. How long have I been here?" "I'm Special Agent Dixon. I'm with the branch of the FBI. We spoke on the phone." The man then stayed silent for a moment and found a chair to pull close to my bed. After sitting down, he finally spoke. "I regret to inform you that you've been in a coma for 6 months, he told me. Upon hearing those words, I grabbed at my hair and pulled, fixing my gaze on my feet as I quietly sobbed. "Mr. Ferguson, there is something else you need to be aware of, and it isn't going to be easy to grasp. The nature of your current situation isn't normal by any means." When I caught my breath and attempted to calm down, I turned my attention to the man, not wanting to believe what I just heard. "What do you mean?" I asked with rising dread. "I think it would be best if you see for yourself," he replied. The man stood up and walked over to the vertical mirror that was mounted on the wall by the bathroom. "Can you stand?" he asked. After I moved the blanket that covered me aside, I heard and felt my bones rattle and pop as I sat up to turn my body to the edge of the bed. I managed to plant my feet on the cold floor and shakily stood up, my body seemingly working against me. "Okay," I said. "Come over here, please." The man spoke, and I slowly made my way to him. I didn't understand what he meant for me to do at first, but I then understood as he motioned for me to look in the mirror. What I saw in my reflection is something my brain didn't fully register until I felt my face. My skin felt like saggy leather, and my cheeks stretched when I gripped them in total shock. My reflection displayed a withered old man. There was no denying that I aged at least 20 or 30 years, and I felt panic surge in my chest. "What is this?" My voice was still raspy as I asked the man,
How is this even possible?
I felt my legs wobble, and he clearly saw that I was struggling, so he helped me get back into my bed. After adjusting my body to being somewhat comfortable, the man spoke again. The entity in that school somehow has the ability to draw out a person's life essence that causes the body to age at a rapid rate. Fortunately for you, it stopped before the process reached a point of no return. Unfortunately, well, you saw for yourself, he explained. The school has done its best to keep this information confidential, but, well, the agent paused and adjusted himself in the chair, then continued. There was a student who went to that school in 1957 and had experienced some kind of mental break. He murdered another student with a knife during school hours. The boy stabbed the poor victim in the stomach and covered the halls with his entrails. Before the police could arrive and began the process of detaining him, the boy cut his own throat and bled out right there next to his victim. Once the police made it to the school, they later found books in his backpack that were linked to occultism and found entries in a journal indicating that a sacrifice had to be made in order to create some blood bind. The family of the murderer was interviewed afterwards, and it was here when police fully understood why the student did what he did. They too were fond of the occult and were later suspected of providing their son with knowledge of this sacrifice, and later pinned for assisting in a murder. We believe the murder-suicide caused a significant impact and created the entity you encountered. My life now consists of me living out my days in a nursing home. The doctors, my family, and anyone else who tries to make sense of my situation is at a loss. Not one person can come up with a logical explanation as to why my body somehow turned into a withering old man. I want to share with anyone who will listen and heed my warning. If you get a new job or get sent to a new work environment like I did, and someone explains that there's a list of rules to follow, even if they are out of this world, whatever you do, follow them like your life depends on it. If you don't, then you may end up like me, or worse.